Neoliberalism is neo-Victorianism. That's all it is. Neoliberalism is neo-fascism. Okay, so in order to understand what neoliberalism is, we have to understand what liberalism is. Liberalism in the Victorian era, simply put, economically, was the corporations and the companies which determined in the economy what was being supplied, the quantities, where they were supplied to, and to whom they were supplied to. So the suppliers and the producers determined the economy. And all that was left was for demand. The people with the money, you and me in the Victorian era, we would just go and choose what we wanted to buy and what we didn't want to buy. That's liberalism. That's liberal economics. That the producer, the suppliers determine the economy. Now, between the 1930s until Margaret Thatcher got into power, we didn't live under neoliberalism or supply side economics. We lived under something called demand theory or Keynesian economics. What was the difference between Keynesian economics? In Keynesian economics, it was the demand side. The people, you and me, the society, the population, we determined what we wanted, and it was up for the suppliers to meet our demand. So, for instance, if in the 1950s we wanted cars, it was then up for suppliers to go produce the cars we wanted and meet the demand that we had for it. It was completely rational. You know, people want food, so let's grow food for them to eat. People like burgers, so let's go fry some burgers. It's not like that today. Neoliberalism, since about the 1970s as an economic form, has been overtaking European, British, North American states and economies, and now that it's global. So now, in the old days, if I wanted a burger and there was enough of us, somebody would open up a burger shop and sell burgers to us, and that would meet our demand. Beautiful. It doesn't work like that. Now it's, well, suppliers have found that it's really cheap to make fake Chinese food where you fry chicken nuggets and then just dump a sauce on it. It's really, really cheap. So although people prefer burgers, it's actually just logistically easier for us to make fake Chinese food with overly sweet sauces, irrespective of what you actually want. Go have a look at the high street. Is the high street meeting your demand, or is the high street telling you this is what we've got and you can either buy from us or you can lump it? Does Greggs respond to your demand, or is it, well, here's a Greg that's just open on the high street. This is what they have to sell. This is all I have to choose from. This is supply side economics. So what changed between supply side and demand side? In the demand side of economics, between the 1930s till say about the 70s and 80s, the government controlled the circular flow of money. The government. And how did they do that? Through the budget. So if we were spending too much and there was inflation and prices were going up, guess what would happen when the budget came up? The government would take money out of the economy to slow it down. Guess what would happen in an economic downturn? The government would inject money to make sure that demand picked up, to make sure that demand and supply met in the middle. Completely sensible. If you have a downturn in the economy, it was very simple to resolve. What do you do now in a supply side economy when you have a downturn in the economy? You can't put more money in the hands of the people. That's demand side economics, and it's inflationary. So the only thing that we can do now in a neoliberal economy like Britain and America is give more money to corporations. Well, corporations are making billions and billions and billions and billions. More and more money since for the last 35 years has ended up in the top 1% than it has since Victorian England. That's your neoliberal economics. It's about taking the money from the poor, the working class, the people that actually produce in the economy. Those people are massively underpaid. They get paid about £20,000-30,000 a year maximum. We tax them like crazy, and we move all of that money that's now in the state, we now hand that over to the utilities that are run and owned by the financial elite, many of whom aren't even British, don't live in Britain, and probably don't even have bank accounts in England anymore. They're all in the Caribbean, South America, Dubai, or what have you. So the state's job now is to collect money from the workers, pool all of that so it becomes hundreds of billions, even $1 trillion. That's our tax money. And then, now that the utilities are all privatized, and remember, all the people who are on these utility companies, they've all gone to Eton, they've all gone to Oxford. It's a tiny group of people. And remember, the journalists who report on the financial elite also went to Cambridge, also went to Oxford. They hang out with each other. So guess what? They're not really going to write about their friends. They're not going to write about the people that went to their alma mater. Who are the middle class bourgeois journalists going to write about? The working class, the poor, the unions, the immigrants, the Muslims, the Hindus, the Sikhs. All that's wrong with our society, in a neoliberal society, are all the things that have got nothing to do with Oxford University, Eton, the financial industry, British intelligence. No. All those people that work in, all the civil service, all the people that work in these institutions went to Oxford and Cambridge. We're not going to criticize them. And even if you did want to criticize them, the journalists won't, because they went to the same universities as them. Some of the time they're even married to each other and go out with each other. So who's left to critique? The poor, the broken, the desperate. Boris Johnson sent billions and billions and billions to some of the wealthiest people in this country and corporations. Guess what we're talking about? Him having a party during lockdown. This is what those who've gone to Cambridge and Oxford who work in the news media do. Deflection. This country is going down the toilet economically, and it's going down the toilet economically because of neoliberalism, because of the economic system that we've chosen. The economic system intentionally fleeces money from the poorest part of the economy and moves it up to the wealthiest. The wealthier they become, the more institutions, corporations, businesses and power they buy in the UK. Which means what? There's less room to criticize these people. But people are desperate and broken. So what's left? All we can do as a culture, as a society, as a neoliberal economy, is fleece the poor and then culturally belittle and insult anyone who's poor, anyone who isn't doing well in society. We'll call them beta males, right? And if you still want to critique, we'll claim that you're homophobic, misogynistic, or against trans rights, even though all we're doing is critiquing the economics of neoliberalism. That's how this game works. Neoliberalism is neo-Victorianism. You have to bear in mind that Victorian Britain was the wealthiest country in the world at the time. Britain was stealing so much from the Chinese. It was forcing them to buy opium, which cost them nothing. They dumped tons of opium every day and forced the Chinese state, the imperial powers, to pay them. All of that money ended up in London. Where are all those trillions of pounds? Where are the massive infrastructure projects that were built in the 19th century? Where's all the massive development? It doesn't exist. All the money that the British stole from India, trillions and trillions and trillions. Remember, when the British entered India in the 17th, 18th century, India was the second wealthiest nation in the world. By the time the British left after the Second World War, 1947, India was the second poorest country in the world. But why did the British leave India? Because they were bankrupt. Even though they were stealing billions and billions and billions in today's money, they spent it all. They didn't invest a penny of it. They were massively in debt as well. Not only did they spend all the money that they stole from the Indian subcontinent, they were massively in debt as well. This is neoliberalism. It's a failed economic system like liberalism. Liberalism in the Victorian era saw continual collapse of the economy. Economies went bust every 3 to 5 years. The majority of the British people were desperately poor, even though Britain was desperately wealthy. There is just something part of Britain where the wealthy elite want everyone else to suffer. It makes them feel good. It makes them feel morally superior. Then they release books and YouTube videos telling you to wake up at 5 in the morning so that you can earn passive income and become a billionaire like everyone else. It doesn't work like that in Britain. Britain isn't an economy based on competence. It's based on who you know, connections. If you want to do well in this society, you need to go through Cambridge and Oxford, or you need to know people who've gone to Cambridge and Oxford and allow them in, and for them to allow them into your, for them to allow you into their circle. That's Britain. That's the USA. It doesn't matter how competent, how skillful you are. If you don't know the right people, you're going nowhere in this society. And that's how they want you, how they want it to be. Because neoliberalism is all about conformity and submissiveness. And guess what we have in Britain and America? Extraordinary levels of submissiveness and conformity. And very few people with either the courage, the skills, or the know-how, or the knowledge to stand up to those in power. The USA and the UK broke the working classes back in the 70s and 80s, destroying unions, destroying manufacturing. Now we have a working class that doesn't have a spine, that is broken and no confidence. They did that on purpose because it was the working classes who were most likely to stand up against today's corruption. The middle classes and the upper middle classes have no history in the UK and the US of ever affecting any positive change in this society. The working day was through demonstration. Over 500 people died, and they were communists and socialists in the middle of the 19th century who fought for a working day. No more than 10 hours a day. And it was the liberals and the middle classes who desperately fought against this. Any right that you have today was fought against by the middle classes and liberals. Women's rights, gay rights, every form of right that exists today was struggled and fought for by a revolutionary, by a radical, usually someone working class or a peasant. We have to stop celebrating the middle classes like neoliberalism wants us to. It is the working classes that produce in this economy. In Amazon, the majority of workers are administrators. The actual people who make money, who pack the boxes, who get the stuff into the vans, they're the ones who are least paid. The ones that make the most money for the company get the least amount of money. But the ones with the degrees, who are quote-unquote professionals, they get the higher wages. We have to break out of this model of thinking about workers in these tiered systems. Work is work. There's no difference between skilled work and unskilled work. I have a PhD. I work highly skilled jobs. But that doesn't mean my job is better than the person next to me who's supposedly unskilled. We should be earning more or less the same amount of money. Wages should be determined by living costs. Living costs. We're all working a working day. We should all be roughly earning the same. There's no need for this massive segregation in terms of how much you're paid. We should be getting paid enough to be able to buy a house, enough to be able to live off, enough to be able to buy a car, and enough to go for one holiday abroad and one holiday in the UK. If we have that sort of money, each and every family in the UK economy will do well. British people will be tied to their state. They'll love their country. You have to secure the borders. That's not a racial thing. Nobody can have affection for their country if the borders aren't secured. Pakistan secured its borders. Before it secured its borders, there was very little identification with the Pakistani state. Once you secure your borders, once you have jobs, security, and a stable government, then Britain can rise again. But these neoliberal, neo-fascist economics, where we move money up to the corporations, where corporations take over the state, that isn't good for anyone.